Wow, it's been a while since my last video. Oops. But I am back, and with a video I've been wanting to make since this game was released in September of 2018. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the final game in Lara Croft's Origin trilogy. At the time of its release, this game was kind of overlooked. Not a lot of people were talking about it, and there didn't seem to be a lot of buzz surrounding the game compared to, say, the 2013 reboot, for example. And the main reason for this was, a week earlier, one of the biggest games of the year was released. That game had much anticipation and people were talking about it for weeks and weeks after its release. But I also think a lot of it came down to Square Enix's marketing. I didn't think there was enough of a push, and at the time when the game was released, the reviews were fine, I guess. And the game didn't sell badly, having actually sold 4.2 million copies by the end of the year. But the last half of 2018 was so big for games, with so many great titles released, much with big anticipation, that Shadow just kind of slipped under people's radar. Well, everyone except the Tomb Raider community, of course, who have had lovely things to say about the game, most of which I disagree with, by the way. While I do have some criticisms of the game, which I will discuss in this video, in my view, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the best game in the Origin trilogy and is one of my all-time favourite Tomb Raider games in the franchise. I will admit my tastes are a little odd when it comes to Tomb Raider, since my favourite game in the franchise is actually Angel of Darkness.
What do you want? Advice? A decent coat? Deodorant?
That's it! Get out of here! Leave me alone!
Bernard, you're a big disappointment to me.
But nevertheless, I think this game is very underrated from both critics and fans. I think this game is a great evolution of the games that have come before, and also a bold step towards the future. So today I want to do a deep dive on this amazing game and give it a bit of a spotlight. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review of Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So before I get into it any further, I'm just going to say that I will be spoiling this game. I'll be talking about the story as well as the tombs in the game, so if you haven't played it yet and want to go in completely blind without knowing anything, that's your warning. With that said, like my Fallout New Vegas review, I will be breaking this video up into sections, and the time codes will be below so you can skip around to wherever you like, and I will also add spoiler tags to the sections of the video that will be spoiler heavy. I want to briefly talk about the previous two games in the trilogy, Tomb Raider 2013 and Rise of the Tomb Raider. Now I also want to lay out some ground rules before we begin. In this video I will not be comparing any of these games to the classic games, with the exception of one statement regarding Shadow, which I'll get into later. The reason I'm doing this is because I don't think it's fair to compare these two eras of Tomb Raider, because they are two very different games, and I'm just not at all interested in getting into the conversation about which one is better, or getting involved in the drama between the classic fans and the reboot fans and all of that bullshit. I just don't care for it, to be honest. I personally like all three eras of Tomb Raider, so this video will be coming from that perspective, but it will also be focused on this particular trilogy of the games and not the series as a whole. Anyway, let's talk Tomb Raider. So the reboot came out in 2013 and was one of my most anticipated games of that year. The game was a reimagining of the series and presented a younger, more inexperienced Lara Croft. The game followed Lara and the crew of the Endurance as they were marooned on the island of Yamatai, and she must learn to survive and figure out how to get off the island, as there is a supernatural force keeping them there. They find out that the island inhabitants are all part of this cult headed by Matthias. No, not that one. Matthias is trying to resurrect Queen Himiko, who is looking for a new vessel, which is in the form of Lara's best friend, Samantha Nishimura, because she is a descendant of Himiko.
She's on the hunt for the lost kingdom of Yamatai, home to the fabulous Himiko, mythical Sun Queen, and ancestor of yours truly.
So Lara and her friends must stop Himiko and save Sam. Out of all the plots in the Origin trilogy, 2013, in my opinion, is the strongest one. The plot is well paced out as the game progresses and has its handful of twists and turns. I think what makes it better partly comes down to the characters. This is a great group of characters despite a couple of them being cliches. This story is before Lara becomes obsessed with her father and Trinity, so the story is much more focused on her and her interactions with these characters. The game takes its time to build the relationship between Lara and some of these other characters, such as her relationships with Roth, Jonah, and Sam. The other characters do have their moments to shine as well, but there is a personal connection between Lara and the other characters, which I feel like the other two games don't really have. I was invested in saving Sam and I wanted Lara to succeed. Lara also grows so much during this story, and while I don't think all the elements of the story are developed as much as they could be, I do think Lara's character arc is very strong. She is a completely different person at the end of the game as to what she was at the start. As for the game itself, it was a bit more of an Uncharted-esque game, which was a departure from what the series was before. But the gameplay here is solid. The gunplay feels good, the level design of the island is fantastic, and the set pieces are engaging. The island also looks really pretty as well, and the only place the game falters when it comes to gameplay is the tombs. There are only really a couple of tombs in the main campaign, and they're mostly used as a plot device or as part of a specific set piece or cutscene. Most of the tomb raiding in this game is left for optional side tombs, which is a formula that they have kept throughout this trilogy, but in this game I kind of felt like the puzzles were really easy and not very engaging. Also, if we're going to talk about negatives, I think one negative with this game in retrospect, I feel like Lara really becomes the Tomb Raider by the end of this game. Her mindset has completely shifted and she has become a much more confident version of herself, which says to me that her origin story was never initially planned as a trilogy. Also, the Lara from the comic book series shares a lot of the same traits as the more classic Lara and is more consistent with the ending of this game than the games that come after it. Also, I think Sam is wasted potential. I really do enjoy her and Lara's relationship, and I really enjoy the history that they have. But the storyline is just left for the comics, and although Sam's storyline is amazing in the comics, and I recommend you all check that out, by the way, Lara never mentions her again in the games, which kind of makes that relationship seem unimportant to Lara, which isn't the case. And that's despite the fact that by the time of Rise's release in 2015, Sam's storyline was still ongoing in the comics. Speaking of Rise, I can't talk about this game without mentioning how Square Enix did me dirty on this one. I was so excited for this game, but it was announced as an Xbox exclusive, which meant I actually had to wait a whole year for this game to release on PS4, but I did finally get to play it when the 20th anniversary edition was released. I have mixed feelings on Rise of the Tomb Raider. On one hand, it's a step up from the formula of the first game, but on the other hand, I just don't think it's as good as the first game. Now, from a gameplay perspective, there is so much game here. Different environments to explore that all felt unique from each other. There were more optional tombs available that I felt this time around had a bit more depth to them. Also some fantastic set pieces and story missions within the campaign. The game also has the best DLC, with the Baba Yaga storyline being one of my favourite parts of the entire game. There was also a challenge mode and a custom mode where players could kind of create their own scenarios with modifiers. There was a kind of Last of Us-esque type mode, which is a lot of fun to play, and of course, who could forget the Croft Manor edition with the amazing story mode filled with Easter eggs of Tomb Raider of old, and the random but fun zombie survival mode that came with it. But the best part of this game was the endurance mode. This is the mode I spent probably the most time in. It's a survival mode where you have to manage Lara's hunger and warmth while simultaneously exploring the randomly generated map and avoiding wild animals and bears, which you can also play co-op with friends, which is quite fun. I will say though that this mode really is limited compared to other modes in the game, and I do feel like this mode should have been expanded upon in later DLC or brought back in Shadow and expanded on further, because there is only one type of map, and even though parts of the map are randomly generated, it was still the same terrain, still the same, practically the same map, and after a while, even though it's fun, it kind of gets a bit repetitive and a bit samey. But overall, there is a lot to love about this game, and these extra modes give it a lot of replayability beyond the campaign. Where this game falls flat for me is the story. Now, it's not a bad story by any means, and I do actually enjoy replaying it now and again, but I have never found it as engaging as the first game. The plot basically shows Lara following in her dad's footsteps, because that's what Tomb Raider fans love. And she is tracking down the divine source, which can grant immortality. The evil Trinity organization is also after it, and it's up to Lara to find it first. Simple enough. There are a couple of twists in the game, but overall it's not as interesting to me. And I think the main reason for this is because it didn't have the same sense of personal connection to Lara like the first game did. Which is odd, considering the whole plot revolves around Lara's father.
Dad never made the connection to Katash. He gave up everything for this.
Including you. Stop blaming yourself for what happened. He made his own bed.
But beyond, like, Jonah and Anna, Lara had no personal connection to any... Shut the fuck up, Bert, I'm trying to record. Lara had no real connection to any of the side characters, and as a result, their inclusion just wasn't as interesting. There weren't any moments where you get a sense of people bonding like you do in the first game. And as a result, Lara feels so disconnected from the events and the characters around her. Now, this does play a bit into her character arc, and that's one thing this game does nicely. To be honest, it does backtrack a bit on her arc from the first game and the comics that expand her origin story. But overall, I don't mind that, as I do really like where the character is going in this middle chapter. She has become obsessed with finding the truth and stopping Trinity. She has this kind of tunnel vision where everything else doesn't matter, and I really like that. Especially with how this trait plays into Shadow later on. This to me shows that the character is still flawed and in a way still finding herself. It shows that she is human. She hasn't evolved into the Tomb Raider we know and love yet. This is merely the next stage of her evolution, and I think when put into the context of her arc across the trilogy, it works quite well. I also really like Anna, who is the main antagonist of the game. Her relationship with Lara is an interesting subplot, although it could have been better handled, in my opinion. But when it was revealed that she was working for Trinity, even though we'd only really known her character for like 5 minutes, it was a plot twist I didn't see coming, and you can really feel the sense of betrayal Lara is feeling in this game.
I've seen how Trinity operates.
Is that a no?
It's a no fucking way! Tell me, Anna, were you recruited by Trinity before or after you started screwing my father?
That was a great scene and a great performance from Camilla Luddington, but I really wish that played a lot more into her character arc throughout the story, giving her like trust issues that she will eventually have to overcome. But the game just kind of moves past it very quickly, so it's a bit of a missed opportunity for some interesting character development. But this is what I mean when I say I have mixed feelings about the game, because to me, ultimately, what Rise represents is a good game, but a lot of missed opportunities. Unfortunately, I don't have much to say about Constantine. He is just kind of there and is just kind of forgettable. But overall, it is a good game, and it is one that I do revisit quite regularly, even if it is only just to replay the very specific story missions that I love, or endurance mode. And it does set up Trinity rather well and further develops Lara's character arc, all setting up for the final game in her origin story. Now, I know I said in the intro that Shadow is the best of the reboot trilogy, and that is a statement that I stand by. However, it's time to clarify that a little bit. With that said, I do want to get the negative out of the way first, so I can spend the rest of the video talking about all of the good stuff. So let's start with a narrative critique. Overall, to keep it simple, I don't think the story of Shadow is bad. In terms of the plot, as in the basics of what is happening to get Lara from point A to point B, I would say it's about on par, maybe slightly better than Rise. I am not going to talk about everything that happens in the story, but there are a lot of good parts and a lot of good elements overall. But there are also a lot of missed opportunities, and put into the context of the trilogy as a whole, some of the setups in previous games aren't paid off in a satisfying way. The story begins with Lara and Jonah in Mexico as they are hunting a local Trinity cell, which leads them to high-profile Trinity member Dr. Dominguez, who is our antagonist of the game. Trinity are looking for a Mayan artifact, the key of Shak's shell, but Lara ends up finding the key first and takes it, sending the Mayan apocalypse into motion. Dominguez later takes the key from Lara and leaves the town as it is hit and destroyed by a flood, which happens because Lara took the dagger without the silver box of his shell. I really love that this game is set on the backdrop of the Mayan apocalypse, as it raises the stakes significantly throughout the story, and we see several catastrophes throughout the campaign in various set pieces. For me, this is what makes this story a little bit more interesting than Rise, and whatever actions Lara takes, the fate of the world is in her hands. So Lara and Jonah head to Peru to find the hidden city, where they should be able to find the silver box. Lara and Jonah crash again, which is becoming a bit of a habit for Lara these days, and are stranded in the jungle. They eventually come across a temple with more clues towards the hidden city, which leads Lara down a path where she eventually ends up finding it. Trinity are also in Peru, and it first seems like they are on the trail of the hidden city as well, but later that is revealed to be different. In this section, we are introduced to Abby, who essentially becomes Jonah's girlfriend. It's great because it provides some development for Jonah, and we also get to see him interact with someone that isn't Lara. In fact, this game gives Jonah a lot of great development throughout its story. This section is great at setting up not only the gameplay loop of the game, but the game's themes and character arcs. Lara eventually finds the hidden city, which is called Paititi, where we learn of this Mayan culture that lives there. We meet Unuratu and learn that she is the rightful queen of Paititi and is also the leader of the rebel faction within the society that is trying to take down the cult of Kukulkan, who was kind of taken over. We find out very quickly that the leader of Kukulkan is Dominguez, and that Kukulkan and Trinity are, I guess, the same thing. So this is where the plot of Shadow falls a bit flat. The game spends so much time on this conflict between the rebels and Kukulkan and all of these characters, between main story campaign missions and side missions. This middle section really drops the pace. The focus moves away from the task at hand, and I also really just didn't care about the rebellion or these characters involved, as they aren't fleshed out enough, and every time the story ended up back in Paititi, it just wasn't as interesting as the rest of the game. Now, the story of Paititi does tie into the overall story as we learn about the ritual of sacrificing the god Kukulkan to power the sun and prevent the apocalypse.
Sacrifice a god?
But we also learn that the power of Kukulkan can be harnessed and used to remake the world. Dominguez wants to use the power of the box for himself. So either way, both options stop the impending apocalypse, but I guess technically the world ends if the power is used. I don't know, it isn't really explained that well. So throughout this portion of the game, Lara continues following clues to find the box while also assisting the rebellion against the cult. Like I said, this is the weakest part of the game, and it also really lets down the whole Trinity arc. The whole reveal of Trinity just being a variation of this ancient cult that's leader's main motivation is to protect one city from the rest of the world is just a bizarre choice and really poses a lot of questions, like what is the point of Trinity as an organization and everything they've been involved with in the past? What is the point of going after artifacts like the Divine Source if their only real goal is to get the dagger and the box? Why wouldn't they just do that from the get-go instead of spending so much time doing all this other useless shit? Why do they have a high council of people pulling the strings everywhere if none of that really has anything to do with their overall goal? Why waste time trying to seize power in the world when they can just just get the box and dagger and remake the world in their image. It seems like that plan is the most effective way for Trinity to get what they want. And also, what does remake the world actually mean? It's never explained. And it is also made clear in the latter part of the game when the High Council of Trinity arrive off screen that while Dominguez is the leader of Trinity, the High Council are just using him to take control themselves. But it is also clear that Dominguez has his own kind of plan going on. I guess he is the only one in the organization that is able to do this, so there's this kind of like weird power dynamic, but also there isn't at the same time. The whole plot just takes Trinity, this powerful organization set up in the previous games as basically the Spectre of Tomb Raider games, to just breaking it down to this feud between Dominguez and the rightful Queen of Paititi. It takes a lot of the mystery away from the organization and makes this storyline feel so disconnected from the rest of the overall story. And I don't even know if any of what I said is even remotely correct. I have played the game 4 times now, and it isn't clear whether Trinity is a separate entity to the cult of Kukulkan, or they're meant to be the same thing and Trinity just does the cult's bidding outside in the real world. I think Lara describes my thoughts on this situation perfectly.
I still have so many questions.
Okay, so I just looked on the wiki, and according to the page on Trinity, they sent out an expedition to find the dagger in a box, and however, when they didn't return, they later sent another expedition to Paititi where they discovered a famine in the city and used this as an opportunity to seize control. Well, good shit. I'm glad I have to look at external references to figure out what the fuck is going on in this game. With that said though, the wiki also says this game takes place in 2018, which just isn't the case, isn't it? In an official Q&A on the Tomb Raider forums, the devs confirmed that this game takes place roughly a year after Rise, which sets this game in 2015, making Lara 23 years old. So the wiki is just straight up wrong here. My point with this whole little tangent that I'm going on is that wikis are an unreliable source of information. And while I'm not saying that the article on Trinity is necessarily incorrect, as this information could be probably scattered throughout the game in all the collectible shit, isn't established directly in the game very well, and I shouldn't have to rely on outside sources to understand a game's story. Anyway, whatever, moving on. So Unuratu is shot by Rourke, and before she dies, she asks Lara to complete the ritual and stop Dominguez. Oh no, a character I didn't care about is all dead. We learn the box is no longer in Paititi, and it was in fact stolen by Andres Lopez during the Spanish conquest of South America. So Lara and Jonah head to the church in, I guess, what must be a nearby town that isn't really that far from Paititi. Yes, I know I may have skipped an entire portion of the game here, but I want to save that for my next segment. So long story short, Lara and Jonah find Lopez's tomb hidden underneath the church, where they find the silver box. But they don't have long to celebrate as Dominguez finds them. Now, I really do love this following scene between Lara and Dominguez, as we do get to learn a lot more about Dominguez and his motivations. We get a much greater understanding of him as a character. It is a really nice scene, and I really wish we got more of this kind of stuff throughout the game. It's scenes like this and the one between him and Unuratu earlier that make him seem like less of a one-dimensional character, which is what he kind of comes across as for like 80% of the game. All great villains, no matter what medium they're in, are only as great when the audience can understand them and understand their motivations. And I just wish this game spent a little bit more time fleshing him out. So Dominguez takes the box and Lara must escape another cataclysmic event, showing that the apocalypse is drawing closer. My favorite part about this whole sequence is the fact that Jonah and Abby just walk off screen, and mere seconds after they do, a big mudslide destroys the town, which Lara barely escapes. Like, there is no way these two would have been able to survive, but in the next sequence, lol joke, Jonah is fine. This happens actually several times throughout the game now that I think about it. Jonah would just disappear and get separated from Lara, forcing us to take really difficult and overly complicated paths to get to our objective. But when we get there, Jonah is just there. There's like no real explanation given other than I went around. Okay, Jonah, so you just went around this mudslide. Right. Lara and Jonah head back to Paititi, where the son of Unuratu, Etzli, and his forces are preparing an assault on the underground temple. Trinity is also there in full force, along with Trinity High Council, which means absolutely nothing to me or anyone else, as they have never been established up until this point and we have never met them. So Trinity's forces cut off Etzli's forces and Lara ends up running into the Yashil, who I only just realized I haven't talked about at all so far. So the Yashil are guardians of the box and they live underground beneath Paititi. They turn up a couple of times throughout the game and attack you as you kind of get closer and closer to the box. They kind of act as this game's supernatural immortal army type thing that both the previous games also had. Lara meets with the big boss lady of the Yashil, who is also what is known in the prophecy as the Crimson Fire. She gives Lara a fancy mask and now Lara has her own personal army. They confront Dominguez, who escapes pretty easily, and then the Yashil attack Trinity forces. So we finally get to the top of the temple where Dominguez has started the ritual, and this is something I have been waiting for in the reboot games for a very long time. An actual boss battle. And it isn't particularly challenging. It's essentially just defeat a few waves of enemies while taking every opportunity to damage Dominguez, who now has the power of Kukulkan. But throughout each stage of the sequence, Lara gets more powerful as she ends up with some of the power of Kukulkan when she takes the dagger from Dominguez. Lara eventually defeats Dominguez, who, before he dies, asks her to protect Paititi. And I really do like this moment as well, as it shows that even though they were on opposite sides of this conflict, there is still a mutual respect between them. Lara sacrifices herself to save the world and restore the sun. Nah, just kidding, it's a fake out. Lara's fine. I'll talk more about this part in a bit, but when the game ends, Lara stays in Paititi to help Etzli rebuild. Overall, I think it's safe to say the story is the weakest element of this game. You will notice in my recap that I skipped big major parts of this game, and I did that for a reason, because in the case of Shadow, the plot isn't really what the game is about, as the plot merely serves as an excuse to get our characters from point A to point B to tell the real story this game is trying to tell. That is of Lara's defining moment and the conclusion to her character arc. This game shines brightest when it is dealing with Lara's journey and the more intimate moments between her and the other characters. So let's now take a look at Shadow's character writing. So this game had a lot of work to do. It had to deliver a satisfying conclusion to Lara's character arc over the course of the 3 games and expanded media, but also provide fans with what they want to see in the conclusion to her origin story, and Lara finally becoming the Tomb Raider we know and love. Fans wanted to see dual pistols, something that the series has hinted at, and they wanted to see Lara have her hair in her iconic braid and things like that. Now, did these things happen? No, they didn't. And depending on what fan circles you're in, this is literally the worst thing they could have done, but I disagree. I don't think it's necessary for Lara to literally transform into the classic Lara Croft. Would it have been cool? Yeah, sure, it definitely would have been cool. The tagline for this game was "Become the Tomb Raider," and I personally don't think the absence of these particular aesthetic elements matter as much as the fandom wants to believe it does. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't become the Tomb Raider by the end. The game is all about Lara evolving into something new, a new version of herself. One free of the constraints that her obsession with Trinity and following in her father's footsteps has placed on her. It is a game purely about the development of Lara's character and her finding her place in the world and her finding her purpose. After Yamatai, Lara becomes obsessed with her father's secrets, which leads her down the path of Trinity. This obsession literally takes over her life. She develops this kind of tunnel vision where the search for answers is all that matters for her. It's this obsession that does lead to some interesting conflicts between her and Jonah, but also the public perception of her changes, labeling her as just another crazy Croft. And to a certain extent, that statement is true. Lara Croft at a point in her life where she really should be in therapy more. This all comes to a head in Shadow, where her blindness to the world around her leads to her finally making a mistake, which is where this game starts. Her mistake puts innocent lives in danger, and it sets off the impending apocalypse. She goes from trying to save the world from Trinity and protecting people to being directly responsible for their deaths. She has innocent blood on her hands. This is shown wonderfully in a nice small moment. Whenever she's climbing along the building and an innocent child is crying out for help and is dangling over the edge, the wall collapses and he falls to his death, and Lara witnesses this happen. This game wants to make it very clear from the very beginning that everything that is happening is her fault. It forces us as players to really start to question our protagonist, her morals, her values. Now, Lara isn't a bad person, of course, but it allows us to experience her growth and change in the same way she is, as these are questions she is asking herself. But in the following scene, she carries on with her mission. Her mission is more important. All this destruction around her, and all she can think about is stopping Trinity. And I love this moment. Jonah loses his shit at her.
No one is safe! Not if he gets the box first! I have to go! I'm the only one!
You're the only one that can what? You don't know that you caused all this, Lara? Not everything is about you! These people need us here. We can do good now!
This is one of the many beautiful Lara Jonah moments in this game. He is the type of friend that isn't afraid to say how it is, and be brutal about it as well. This acts as a huge wake-up call for Lara. As she sits looking over the destruction, she realizes Jonah has a point. From this point on, the game becomes all about Lara trying to fix her mistake and make things right. But also this game has a strong theme of letting the past go. Lara is trapped in the past. Dominguez is trapped in the past. The imagery of the eclipse is a literal representation of this. The past is the shadow. This is also explored in the campfire scene when Lara asks Jonah if he will go back in time to save his brother. He responds with this.
I like this world. It's not perfect. But everything I love now is in it.
Unlike everyone else, Jonah isn't stuck in the past. He lives in the present, and his role in this game is to assist Lara in doing the same. Jonah may not always agree with Lara, but he is still there to support her. I love the small moments where this game takes 5 minutes to pause and show an intimate moment between these two friends. Whether it be when they reunite in the jungle and they have a moment where Lara cuts out the parasite worm from Jonah's arm and they have a laugh and a joke. Or in the campfire scene where they have a real deep and meaningful. These moments are what makes this game so special. Jonah is essentially the voice of reason. He is Lara's conscience in a way. We literally see Lara stuck in the past when she relives her childhood memories. We get to play as a younger Lara playing around, going on an adventure in Croft Manor. I adore this section of the game. It's such a change of tone from the rest of the game and is really a fun, light-hearted level. We do all the Tomb Raider things, explore, platforming and puzzle solving, but what all this leads to is Lara discovering her mum's things and her reliving her father's death, further emphasizing that she can't move on. From the very get-go, from the initial announcement trailer, this game showed a more darker Lara, and while that is a bit different to what we get in the eventual game, we do still get to see the darker, more brutal side to Lara, just like my favorite emo Lara. And at times in this game, Lara lets her darker side out. This is obviously evident in the latter part of the game when Jonah and Lara are attacked at the river. You see it in her face in this scene. She is so done. And the entire following sequence leads to a moment of extreme brutality. Rourke tells Lara that Jonah is dead. Now, of course, I didn't believe this personally, as if they would just kill Jonah off screen like that. But Lara doesn't know that. She unleashes the beast and goes on a rampage. We get to literally see her explosive side. When she appears out of the water and just slowly approaches the guy, killing him with zero mercy. And then she just shoots up the place, screaming out threatening lines as she does.
You are fucking dead.
Now this could all be considered, I guess, out of character by some people, but I completely disagree. We all have a tipping point where we get pushed just that little bit too far, and the whole game has been setting up for something like this to happen. There is a reason why this game spends so much time with Lara and Jonah. Lara has been pushed to the edge here, and she snapped. And also, Lara is in a very vulnerable place as well, questioning herself and doubting her motives, so of course, she's gonna be a bit emotional. This path of destruction leads her to the point where she almost kills herself. But when she finds out Jonah is alive, she breaks, realizing that all of her actions just lead to more destruction. But Jonah once again becomes the voice of reason and helps Lara overcome her guilt and allows her to focus on what to do next. Lara is reluctant at first, but it eventually leads her to having a revelation about where the box could be. I cannot stress enough how important this moment is. The game's dialogue focuses on the mystery of the location of the box, but the subtext of the moment, her realizing what she is becoming and where the path she is on will lead, and she actively makes the choice to go in the opposite way. She can only become the Tomb Raider because of the choice that she makes in this moment. This is the catalyst that allows the final building blocks of the game to be put in place and allows her to become the Tomb Raider. When I first played the game, I thought this was Lara's defining moment. However, that is not the case. That comes at the end of the game, after Dominguez is defeated. Lara is first unaware of the position she has now found herself in, but when the boss lady turns up to complete the ritual, Lara realizes what this means. She pieces the puzzle together and realizes that this is the end of her journey. All her actions, everything she has ever done, has led her to this moment. She is sacrificing herself to save the world, and when that moment comes, Lara revisits her memories. She sees her family. This is her defining moment. The moment where she makes peace with her past and accepts it and moves on. You can have your own view on what becoming the Tomb Raider should mean, and you can have your opinion on whether this game did that for you and satisfied you or not. But this moment, this right here, when Lara walks away from her past, this is when she becomes the Tomb Raider. This is when her mentality shifts. This is when she enters a state of being that is the Lara Croft that we know. But the Lara we see in the final moments of this game is a different Lara to before. She has more clarity now. She has a purpose in life. At first, that might be to help Paititi rebuild, but as we see in the bonus credits scene and her little monologue, her desire to find hidden secrets of the world and discover what stories they have to tell. She doesn't even need Jonah as a voice of reason anymore, which is why they set up in the game that a potential life for Jonah and Abby. She has, in every sense of the word, become the Tomb Raider. She has found herself. Yeah, the aesthetic changes can come in later down the line in their own time, but she has found her purpose, and now a whole new journey begins for her. And this right here, Lara's character arc in this game, is why it is one of my favorite Tomb Raider games, and why I believe it's actually one of the best ones. So I wanted this review to focus more on the narrative elements of the game rather than the technical, but then I thought, well, no, that would be a disservice to the game. At the time of making this part of the video, I have started uni again and no longer have the time to go in depth like I originally wanted to. So I'll keep this section short and sweet. Remember way back when I said I was only going to compare this game to the classics once? Well, here we go. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the most Tomb Raider-y Tomb Raider game that has ever been Tomb Raided. It's the closest to classic Tomb Raider the reboot games have gotten. And while I still think the Crystal Dynamics' first go at a reboot was, in my view, a natural evolution of the original Tomb Raider formula, but if that was the natural evolution of old school Tomb Raider, then Shadow is the natural evolution of the entire franchise to date. When I play through this game, it just feels more like a Tomb Raider game. The big reason why this is because the game has a bigger focus on exploration and puzzle solving, where the previous entries were more focused on action and set pieces, which are still here as well, but they kind of take a back seat this time around. Exploration and puzzle solving were at its core what Tomb Raider was about, and playing through Shadow was almost like coming home in a way. It's a great balance of old and new. You spend so much time in this game just wandering about, exploring each environment. There are hidden treasures, challenges, and hidden tombs all over the map. As you progress through the game, there are a few environmental puzzles to solve as well to progress the story forward. And there is so much to see in each of the game's hub areas. The larger areas like Paititi have a lot of secrets and sights to uncover. While I may not bother with exploration too much now after 5 playthroughs, on my first playthrough I spent so much time soaking in the world, and I am glad that I did, because a large portion of this game is set in these populated areas. The game feels so much more alive than the previous games. There are people just going about their business in the world, and some of them you can interact with. This is the most fleshed out world of the 3 games. Throughout the world, you can also find side missions to complete, as well as all the DLC missions. I don't have a lot to say about the DLC of this game. It's not anywhere near as good as Rise's DLC offering. It's just basic story missions with a tomb attached on, essentially. About 90% of these missions I didn't really care about in the slightest, but I can tell you the DLC tombs themselves are the best tombs in the entire game. They are each so unique and challenging. I enjoy replaying them from time to time. Hands down, my favorite DLC mission in this game is The Nightmare. The story is so twisted, and I especially love the scene at the end where Lara confronts a nightmare version of herself. The other DLC mission I liked was the final one, which told the story of what happened to the Yashil after the events of the main game. When it comes to the gameplay loop of the game, the majority of it, like I said, involves exploration and puzzle solving, but there is also the combat. Well, there's a bit of it anyway. The game doesn't have a lot of straight up shootout combat sections. The game focuses heavily on stealth gameplay. In fact, I'd say about 95% of the game's combat is stealth focused. Now, beyond a couple of sections that are entirely stealth, and if you try to run a gun, you will die every time, these sections can also be completed with a shootout as well. But the game encourages stealth gameplay. I love how you can utilize the environment around you, covering yourself in mud, hugging the vines on the walls, hiding in the bushes. It all flows really well and can be pretty tense at times as well. But when it comes to the gunplay, Shadow is the best the reboot has been. It's essentially just the same weapons you are used to from the previous games, but they all just feel like they pack a little bit more of a punch this time around. I'm not going to go too much into this, but the game has the best optional tombs of the series so far. They are all really well designed puzzles and are challenging to complete, which is so refreshing after 2 games of just mediocre side tombs. Swimming is also a really big part of the game as well. Usually in games, swimming is always like the weakest part, but here the underwater segments are actually some of the strongest segments of the game, and the swimming mechanics are some of the best I have seen in gaming to date. All up, Shadow is an incredibly fun and challenging game to play, and you can also adjust the difficulty for specific aspects of the game in the menu to make things like combat, puzzles, and environmental exploration more challenging. To sum it up, this is one of the most rewarding Tomb Raider experiences in the series, and is the most fun I have had in a Tomb Raider game. While I don't think it's the best one, it's certainly gonna be up in my top 5. Actually, it'll probably be in my top 3, to be honest. I recommend, if you haven't given Shadow a try yet, go pick it up and play it. The definitive edition is out, so you can get the full experience. It's well worth your time, and even if you haven't played a Tomb Raider game before, I think this is also a good jumping on point. Shadow of the Tomb Raider encapsulates everything that makes Tomb Raider Tomb Raider. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you did make it to the end of this video, congratulations. I must have been a bit of a slog, so well done. Thank you so much for watching the whole thing. But yeah, this is going to be probably my last long form video for quite some time, just based on my workload with uni and everything. I just don't really have the time to be making long form videos, but don't worry, I'll still be making videos. I'm just going to be reassessing what type of videos I should be making moving forward, at least while I'm continuing to study anyway. I already have my next long form video planned, it's just when I get the time to actually make it. But this has been so much fun making one of these videos again, and I'm so glad to be back making videos again. So if you did enjoy this video, please make sure you leave a like. And before we end, I just want to let you guys know, you've probably seen me uploading them, but I do now have a podcast called the Turning Point Podcast. You can find it in the links in the description. You can also find the episodes so far on my channel. I upload the episodes onto my channel, as well as uploading them to things like Spotify as well. So it's a pretty cool little podcast. We talk about video games, we talk about movies, we talk about TV shows, we talk about a whole bunch of geeky stuff. It's a great time. But yeah, the reason why I started the podcast is because I knew I probably wasn't going to have a lot of time to make videos, and I wasn't going to be able to cover the things that I want to cover. So doing a podcast allows me to cover more things without having to make videos for them. So if you do enjoy the content that I make on here, then definitely check out the podcast. I think you guys will like it. But yeah, that brings us to the end of the video. So once again, thank you so much for watching. And don't forget to like if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you think of Shadow of the Tomb Raider or the Tomb Raider games in general. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe if you're new and you like this kind of content. And I'll catch you guys all in the next video.